Hi, this is Seth Kahn, and I am standing at Dulles Airport getting ready to board my plane to Germany. I'm looking forward to going to Berlin because of the city's history of transformation. I know there will be many lessons for those of us who are studying grand challenges. Today, I want to talk about interdependencies. This is a much misunderstood concept, especially when it comes to systems. People need to realize that interdependencies are relationships that travel in at least two directions, and as many directions as there are people and groups involved. And so they're very complicated. They are what make a wicked problem wicked, so that you smooth out the sheets on the bed in one location and the wrinkle pops up somewhere else. It's through these interdependencies that the so-called wrinkles travel. And that's why grand challenges, which are collaborative responses to significant social problems demanding large-scale change, are so needed. Wicked problems are difficult or impossible to solve because of their complex and interconnected nature. That's exactly why they need our sustained attention. Wicked problems demand interventions, and the grand challenge methodologies and frameworks I share are wonderful means for developing them. A wicked problem is a complex system of systems in which at least one aspect has stabilized into an undesirable state, and that's the challenge that we're facing. So when we have something like Healthy Nurse, Healthy Nation that seeks to make America's 4 million nurses measurably more healthy, we have to recognize that the system has stabilized with them being unhealthy. And so we're going to need an intervention that hits it at multiple points and reorients the entire system. Just like a hanging object on a mobile, it needs to be moved with all of the other forces moved as well. Otherwise, it'll just bounce back to where it originally started. This is the aim of a grand challenge's common agenda. That term, common agenda, is taken from the work on collective impact, and it is the single goal that all of the systems have in mind when they join forces to work together on the grand challenge. So, again, drawing on Healthy Nurse, Healthy Nation, the common agenda is to measurably improve the health of America's 4 million nurses. And that's something that the U.S. Army, CVS Caremark, the American Nurses Association Enterprise, and all of the organizations that joined us have in common. They are focused on achieving that common agenda. Now, we need to bring in the systems model for change. Wicked problems get enmeshed in the systems within which people, groups, and institutions operate. And I'd like to draw now from the work I'm doing with Stop Stigma Together, the initiative to eliminate the stigma, bias, and prejudice around mental health and substance use disorders in the United States. We have a three-dimensional model that we use, and we drew that from the 2016 publication from the National Academies that addresses mental health and substance use disorder stigma. And that three-dimensional model includes structural stigma, social stigma, and individual stigma. Structural stigma is stigma that is perpetuated in laws and policies. Social stigma is stigma that takes place through interactions, whether it's a couple talking with each other, a group in a community center, in the workplace, in a place of worship, in a shopping mall. Anywhere people interact, social stigma can come into play. And lastly, there's individual stigma, and this is the bias that takes place in the privacy of our own minds, in our internal dialogue, how we frame and think about things. In order for stigma to be successfully addressed across the United States, we need interventions that take into account all three of these dimensions. So the systems model for change, which I developed drawing from some work that took place for the CDC, includes three different levels. It includes personal beliefs, that's akin to the individual stigma. It includes social systems, and I'm going to go through several levels of social systems here, but this is the social element. And then, of course, it includes structural systems, local, state, and federal policy. If anyone is going to succeed with their grand challenge, they're going to need to design specific interventions for each of these systems. There needs to be intentionality, that when you focus on these systems, that you are actually coming up with initiatives that take into account the interdependencies. You can count on things bouncing back, becoming more when you talk about a linear system, you're talking about when you push on a lever, the lever moves and you get the result you want. When you talk about an interdependent complex system, you can push on that same lever and nothing might happen, or it might swing in the opposite direction, or there might be a long delayed reaction and a whole series of reactions that flow out of it. This is what makes complex wicked. So if you're going to succeed with your grand challenge, you need to design these specific interventions for each system to move it in the direction of support that you want to see change in the world. Let me give an example from another grand challenge, the Intellios Ultrasound Proficiency Grand Challenge. That's ensuring that everyone who uses a medical ultrasound is doing so in a safe way. It's for the sake of patient safety. And without medical practitioners proficient in sonography, misdiagnosis is too frequent. In fact, I've heard of situations where highly trained doctors get a hold of an ultrasound and don't think that they need training in it, and then they issue a diagnosis that can actually cause patient harm because they don't understand what they're doing. And as the price of ultrasounds, medical ultrasounds, drops, there's one that's been patented now for as little as $100, more and more people are going to be using these devices. And so making sure that everyone is proficient becomes a huge issue. But getting the grand challenge inside of America's healthcare system to ensure that everyone who operates a medical ultrasound knows what they're doing is riddled with challenges from all sides. Everything from how training takes place to the mores and taboos in the medical system to expectations around certification to compliance and regulations itself. That is truly a wicked problem. And it's something that requires the attention of people who are working on this grand challenge. So let me go through the 3 levels of systems model change. First of all, personal beliefs. This is the core level of the systems model. It's easy to understand. There is a web of associations that takes place inside everybody's mind, perceptions about what's right, wrong, their mindset, their personal beliefs. These need to be addressed. So, for example, healthy nurse, healthy nation. Let's say that a nurse wants to lose weight, but in her mind, she's saying to herself, I've tried everything and nothing works. If that belief persists, then it's not likely that she'll see results this time. So the beliefs themselves have to be addressed. Let's take a look now at social systems. These are the multiple relational communities that mesh with the personal and structural systems, the interdependencies I'm talking about. And here, there's several spheres that I like to take into account. The first is interpersonal relationships. These are the people you interact with daily, including people you share your home with, or anyone who's a regular part of your life, such as your faith community. Even the people you see every day at work, or people in the dog park, or the PTA, or camping buddies, whoever you're interacting with, your interpersonal relationships. And if you're going to successfully address a grand challenge where the result that you want is being held in place by interpersonal relationships. For example, nurses at the nurse station. They do well with a patient, the family is grateful, they bring the nurses a bunch of donuts. That's not going to help with measurably improving their health, and that is an interpersonal relationship issue that needs to be addressed. Another social system are places of work. I just talked a little bit about families bringing donuts, but when you go to a hospital, almost every nurse's station has that manila envelope which contains in it all the fast food places that will deliver on short order so that the nurses can keep working, whether it's pizza or tacos or hamburgers or who knows what. Chances are that that manila folder is not filled with healthy choices, but we can do something about that. That's an example of addressing places of work. And of course, it goes beyond little volunteer activities like that. For example, is the cafeteria open at night, providing healthy meals to nurses who are working around the clock? Another social system are the professional communities. And working with the nurses, we discovered that professional communities are both regional and they're also about the profession itself. So for example, nurses in Atlanta, Georgia have different issues than nurses in Seattle, Washington. But beyond that, nurses in the ER have different issues than pediatricians. So we have to take into account both professional communities and regional communities. And then the last element is what we call structural, and here we get with local, state, and federal policy. These are the laws and regulations that you operate under. They're set by local and state and federal governing bodies, and the majority of Americans look to their elected officials and appointed officials, as well as the bosses in the places of work, to create the rules that govern our behavior. We don't usually get involved with making those rules. Most people don't. We just want to make sure that we comply with them, that we don't break the law, that when we're carrying out our jobs, we're doing the right thing by the place where we work. And that's why it's so important that these policies and laws reflect the change you want. You can have, for example, mental health stigma built into a workplace policy. That's not good. You need to address that policy because people will perpetuate that stigma simply by doing their job and complying with the rules if you don't. So when your initiative engages public servants who can rally constituents, pass legislation, and spearhead the necessary policy changes, you increase your ability to achieve the systems level change I'm talking about. And that's why it's so important to bring in friendlies from the government as early on as you can. You want people who are going to be involved in that legislation or that policy change to understand and to be amenable to the change that you're trying to create, not trying to get up to speed at the last minute. So just quick review of that again. So I talked about personal beliefs, social systems, and structural systems. And each of these are systems within systems. You can see why it's so complicated. But take heart, things can be done to achieve success. And in fact, that's what my work in Grand Challenges is all about. Solving social problems is inherently social. It happens in community. And so people need to work together. Before I finish this particular podcast, I just want to give credit to the folks at the Center for Disease Controls who developed the original model that I drew from to create my own, and that was headed up by Kenneth McLeroy and his team at the CDC. They wrote about it in their publication, An Ecological Perspective on Health Promotion Programs. This is Seth Kahn. I hope you're enjoying this podcast on Grand Challenges, and I'll see you in the next episode.